First item of the approval of the minutes of the Wednesday, September 24th meeting. I think you all have that, and I think
So
we'll
moved.
Second.
Thank you. A motion and a second. Yes, Phil,
Question?
please.
Page 3, the end of the first long paragraph, it makes a reference to the Bocasset River. Is that accurate or a mistake?
Please ask Stacy.
It's Norquoit and Pocasset River on page 3 of the, should be posted.
We don't.
There's a bunch of stuff.
So thank you, Phil. Jeff, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I had two comments on that. One is this bullet point, the next to last bullet point on page 4, all Pleasant Bay is considered ACEC. The description of inlet widening and dredging is very confused and confusing. It describes inlet widening does not change the pond depth. The issue is tidal prism, and the issue is increasing the tidal prism, not increasing the pond depth. Nobody talked about the pond depth. We talked about the depth of the approach channel for navigation and getting more water in. And what was said was that you won't increase the tidal prism.
So it should be just the inlet widening alone does not alter the tidal prism.
Inlet widening or dredging will not increase the tidal prism, which is what you're trying to do. One more.
One more, please,
Yeah.
Jeff.
In both the September 24th and October 8th meeting minutes, some references to comments I made on restoring natural ecosystem services were in some cases misstated and are certainly not a clear explanation of what was discussed. It talks in both sets of meetings, minutes, it talks about the restoring natural ecosystems is associated with reducing sediment, quote unquote, reducing sediment. Nothing was said about reducing sediment. What I stated was that the in situ solutions will restore natural ecosystem services which improve both water quality and sediment quality, and in turn restore habitats, create biodiversity, sustainability, and resilience. But both sets of meetings reflect a deeper misunderstanding of that matter.
You have it specifically, where is it in the 24th?
Well, in one case, in the 8th of October, it's in the last bullet on page 8. I don't have a copy of the one, but it talks on September 24th also about quote unquote reducing sediment.
What I'd suggest is, Jeff, on the minutes on the 8th, they're still in draft form, so I would send those comments to Stacy, and they'll be incorporated in the 8th ones, which we'll approve next time. On the 24th, if you have words, you can send those to Stacy, and we'll just approve it as amended, which,
All right.
if that's okay.
Yeah, but there's maybe I'll hold the comment for later. But there's more that's confused. That's gotten confused in the write-up of the minutes. It doesn't reflect what was said or the meaning of what was said. If you want me to explain, I'll explain now, or we can talk about this later.
I wonder, Jeff, if you and I can chat. I tried to make the corrections that you sent me, but it sounds like I still didn't quite get it right. So why don't we plan to talk? And
Well, I also want to make sure the group understands this. I mean, the fundamental of this is that restoring natural ecosystem services is not an option. It's a necessity. It's an essential. Reducing nitrogen will help the water system, but we have, in order to achieve the goal that DEP and everyone wants, which is improving water quality and improving the system, we have to get the natural ecosystem services back working for us. And if we don't do that, we're just going to have nitrogen levels down, but we're not going to have a system that functions. That's the essence of it.
What you're saying there is that some processes or alternatives like dredging are also part of that mix, or what?
Primarily referring to shellfish, aquaculture,
Yeah, okay.
reefs, that sort of thing, things that
Okay.
impact multiple aspects of
Okay.
the operation of the water system.
May I suggest, Stacy and Jeff, do you want to just hold these minutes then? And we'll approve them the next time? Would you two get together and work on the wording and the placement of this stuff?
Sure.
We've got other things to move on to today. So let's do that, then.
Motion withdrawn.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath. Okay, then we'll finalize those at these are the next meeting, and you two will get together.
Great.
Okay, on this, I'll turn it over to Stacy and Mike.
Okay, thanks. So just to say on minutes, it's very helpful to get people's comments. Sometimes when I get your comments, and your comments seem to be clarifying beyond what seemed to have been said at the meeting, I may not, I don't want to go too far in changing the minutes to clarify a concept that, beyond what it seemed like was discussed at that meeting. So I want to make sure I get it right so that the message is clear while still being really consistent with the conversation that we had at that time. But I will make sure that happens, that I do that better. Okay, so from October 8th, meeting summary, again, I've already started to get some people's comments, and that's really helpful, so continue to send those my way. Today's agenda, focusing on the traditional bookend, modified traditional bookend, and an overview of the financial framework. So that's the focus of today. It'll include looking at the septage and food waste update on what's been going on with that study, alternative treatment and disposal site evaluation in progress, and then we'll really spend time in detail on the modified traditional bookend, wastewater flows, sewering criteria and approaches, and then walking through each sub-watershed the way we did with the non-traditional. So that's going to be the main focus, and then we'll spend a little time on the financial analysis. One important item on the back of your agendas, for those who I just printed things out for, is a new panel list. And if you look closely, you will see there is a new liaison member on that list. The Orleans Conservation Trust, which was on the original list of groups that were invited to send a liaison, has now voted to participate with a liaison officially, and they've elected Chris Ramsey to be their liaison. So Chris has joined our table, so you all can welcome Chris.
Welcome aboard.
Happy to be here.
So the website is being updated, and then this is your new list of representatives to reflect that. I also just want to raise a question about copies. So I've continued to, we were a little delayed in getting copies to Town Hall. Our apologies. I think there was some confusion on responsibilities since I was out of the country. So sorry about that. But we did still have 10 copies here as of Monday, and then I brought copies for everybody else today. Do people prefer that I bring the copies of the material, or are people printing them out at home? I just want to get a sense so we're not wasting paper.
I say bring.
I think it would be helpful to bring, because printing some of these large documents at home make sure they're unreadable.
Okay.
It comes out so tiny you
Can't read it.
Yeah.
Well, we always bring the
Yeah.
11 by 17s.
I think if we could get those in advance, it would be helpful.
And those we're going to aim to have for you on time by Friday here, always. But then the other documents, are people okay with not having those in advance and me just bringing them? Or, what, you know, do you still want me to have the whole packets in advance? I know there's a few people at least who really want the full packet in advance. That I can certainly do. Right now, we've been doing like 10 copies in advance, so we have plenty for the people who pick them up. And it sounds like probably best then I just bring another 20 or so, and we'll have the full packets ready for people.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'll carry that, I'll carry on with that, just want to make sure we're not wasting trees. All right, same ground rules apply. You guys have been fairly good with the ground rules, be concise, right, be considerate, turn off ringers and such things now if you haven't already. And we'll continue to allow interactive, including all of the people in the, who are not at the table to participate, as long as we're moving efficaciously through our agenda. As action items from October 8th, we put the updated project schedule on the website. I didn't send it to you all because I wasn't sure everybody wanted to see it. But it's now on the website. If people want printed copies, let us know, and we'll have copies delivered here so people can have them. But so that has been done. We did do the draft meeting summary. We had talked about having the food waste study copy sent out. I think that it isn't ready to be distributed. It's still being developed. Is that correct? The food waste study. Is it a previous one, or is this the one that you're doing now? Okay.
But, sorry, I had asked whether or not the previous study you'd done for another town would be available, and I've been looking for it on the website, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so I think that's where we were trying to figure out exactly what that action item was.
So what, Mr. Ramon, what we were thinking is, what's been done previously by our firm is, it was a study that, a review of DEP information that we presented in our interview for this project. There was a slide that we put together that Charlie Alex had presented, Charlie's here today. That's the only information that I know of that's been done to look at a food waste topic on the Cape, outside of what information's been presented by DEP. So our firm has not done any study for any community on the Cape.
Then I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood you, because I thought there was a study.
The information that I'm referring to that we had presented to the town when we were interviewing for the project, that information is part of the presentation today, so maybe it'll look familiar if you've
Okay.
seen it.
Just a quickie. Charlie, has there been a Cape-wide or any food waste study done for the Cape by any other firm that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of, but
Okay.
the best information I found was the information we give today.
Okay, great.
Okay. I am still working on updating the public engagement ideas from the discussion that we had. And we have started drafting an executive summary of sort of process to date. And we've been talking with the local papers about their deadlines and requirements. So that is all in progress, and we are planning on making that part of what we're doing. And we haven't prepared the fact sheet yet for town meeting, but my question to you all was, what's the date that you need that by, so that it can be as up to date to that point before we produce it?
Well, town meeting is next Monday night,
Okay.
so
You need something now.
as soon as you could.
Good, that's what I need.
Not a lot of time left.
Stacy,
Yeah.
to send it directly to Alan, because he's the one that has to stand up at town meeting and explain where we are.
Okay. Will do. So that'll be done. And the other items were completed from the action items. Any questions about action items? Anything I missed? Okay. All right. So as part of this, we also want to just review sort of where today fits into the overall schedule, so we can pull that up in a minute. Are we ready to move on then to that? Okay.
Good morning, all. This slide should look familiar by now, and we are introducing this topic here, Olean's traditional plan today, moving through the process. And we'll have, we've got a few speakers for you today to introduce a number of different topics. Charlie Alex is going to be presenting the septage and food waste market study. He's responsible for preparing the technical memorandum on that, and we're getting close to wrapping up that document, but he will share with you what he knows on that topic today. And then Lauren is going to jump up and talk about alternative siting. We did an evaluation of a number of different sites, and we'll give you our thoughts on those sites that may have some merit in further study. Steve will then provide a description of the so-called traditional bookend, and talk a bit about some issues at Tri-Town as well. And then Lou is going to give a presentation on the different sub-watersheds and what a strategy would be, what a sewering and traditional strategy would be for each of the individual watersheds, sub-watersheds. And then last but not least, Doug Gardner is our sub-consultant with Pioneer Consulting, and Doug is going to give a brief presentation on the approach for the financial evaluation and model that we're going to employ on this project. Okay? So that'll take us, I'm sure, right up to the end. Lots to cover. So, Charlie, if you want to get started.
Good morning. I'm Charlie Alex. I'm going to talk about the septic food waste, as Gary mentioned. So the goals of the study to look at the current and the future amounts of both septic and food waste. What is it you have to deal with? Treatment options, capacity both on Cape and off Cape, and then some treatment alternatives for the solids of the septic and the food waste, or combined. Back in 2005, Ray Pierce did a study of the total amount of septic generated on the Cape, and that's that 59 million gallons a year down at the bottom. What I did is I took the Cape Cod Commission has water use statistics for every town and for every actually parcel, and I used those on a town-by-town basis to sort of distribute how much septic is being generated, because the water use is certainly tied to the septic generation. There's other things that can impact water use, but it's a decent, good correlation. And we looked, they have ultimate build-out water use numbers by town, and these were the percent increases that we were looking at, and these are pretty high. Brewster 42%, Orleans 39%. Those are fairly large increases in water. So we wanted to look, before we leaped into saying the septic would go up, that what other factors are there? Because these numbers look pretty high. The first thing we looked at is population. The rate of growth of population on the Cape from 1980 on has been in steady decline. In fact, from 2000 to 2010, there was actually about 3.9% negative growth. So you lost that much population. In addition to that, you have an aging population. If you look, in Orleans has 36% of the population is 65 or older. And at the time, that was back in, from the 2010 census study, that's actually the highest percentage of any town in the state. Brewster, 26.2 is number 6, and Eastham, 26 was number 7. So Cape-wide, the percentage of the population that's 18 or under declined from 2000 to 2010 by 18%. So the other thing, that's for population, you don't see any large swing or influx. And if you were, where would they go? So the next thing I looked at was the developable land. What is the possibilities of future development that would obviously drive septage increases? In 2003, the town has a land use committee that did their study. They had there was 605 acres, or about 6.7% of the town of considered developable land. Eastham only 2.7%. A little bit later, 293 acres. Brewster 459 acres, but only 2.8% of the town. So there isn't a huge amount of developable land available. So you're not going to see, where you're going to see this influx of population that's going to drive the septage. So the water use alone was probably too far. Those are just water use, and they're probably ultimate build-outs. They're probably ultimate build-outs. There wasn't a year for those particular water uses. The population in general is trending downward. There's limited available land for development, so there's septage may be replaced, at least here in town, with more higher volume sewage. So there's really no reason to see any large swing or increase in septage quantities out for any kind of reasonable design life of 20 or 30 years. Sure.
Do we know if DEP would, that's a pretty significant assumption moving forward. Do we know if DEP would accept, or a commission would accept that as a design premise? Is that an issue?
I think when you get to the design, we'd have to sharpen the pencil and refine that to see if there was some safety factor you'd put in, or some increase. If there's any other, look for any other driver. Probably you'd want to put in the ability to add on, but you always leave space for the next train. But I think that you'd be.
We'll do that anyway. Can we make a recommendation that we clear this with DEP?
Absolutely, and maybe Bryant has some comment on that now. But
Well, I mean, the only thing that I would say is that whatever recommendations would be made, we would have to evaluate on the available data that's presented. I can't speak specifically to it right now because I haven't seen any data. But I mean, it is reasonable to assume that if there is an increase in collection systems and therefore a decrease in on-site systems, that there would be a concomitant decrease in septage.
Sims?
One of the things that the Wastewater Management Steering Committee focused on was not so much developable land, but the use of the land that has already been developed. And a substantial portion of that, perhaps even in excess of 50% of the number of bedrooms in town, are used on a seasonal basis. And the growth in water use, the concern is not new development, it's the change in use of existing development.
Is that
Yeah. So there is that factor that how the water gets used or why more water gets used to be different. And that's why we looked at the other factors. You may use more water, but are you really going to drive up septage? And I think population is much more tied to septage than water use. But water use is certainly the first place we looked, because there's lots of data on it.
I think, as Jim suggests, this is something we put down as an action item to follow up on. Also, I think your comment, Charlie, is important in that the planning has to include contingency for future, that there's going to be uncertainty related to this. So whether there's growth in the way land is used and density of population or seasonality of population, that has to be considered. So that'll be within the bounds of the design criteria for
facilities, whatever they are.
Quick question on East Camp, with no centralized water system, wells everywhere, how do you arrive at a usage figure?
I got all that information from the Cape Cod Commission. They actually have usage by every lot and by town-wide, so.
Thank you.
Just so the people in the back know, there's a separate sign-in sheet for the table, so you don't have to give the clipboard to the table.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the table doesn't need it. Go ahead, Paul.
Is this the time for comments about the septage market, or do you want to wait till you're done
No,
with all this?
he's going to get there.
I've got more for that.
Yeah.
This right now is just quantities. Food waste, again, in looking at food waste. So in 2002, the Mass DEP embarked on a very ambitious study of every single town, every single producer of food waste in the state. And they came up with generated numbers of tonnages per year for every single town in the state. In 2007, the US EPA updated that information, and that's the source of all this data. The bottom line is about 14,000 tons per year, probably maybe round it off and call it 15,000, is generated Cape-wide. And obviously with the seasonality, that doesn't all happen on a nice even flow amount per day. It's obviously more in the summer, less in the winter time, but it's important. That number's important, so keep that in mind. As far as growth in food waste, we see it sort of follows the same trends as the septage. It's a little bit more influenced by seasonality. So if you have a bigger, larger seasonal flux than you've had in the past, you might see this increase anymore. I mean, anecdotally, I've been coming to the Cape since I was 5 years old, and I'm long past that age now. And you don't see any time a restaurant that comes into business, if it goes out of business, someone takes its place, but you don't see any new restaurants being built, and that's the main driver here. One thing that might push this is institutions. So if you have more elderly housing or assisted living kind of developments, those have been a little more prevalent in the last few years. Those might drive that up a bit.
Could you define what you mean by food waste? What does it mean? Is it private homes, is it just businesses?
No, this was all developed from businesses. This is all, the state has new regulations that came into effect on August 1st, that every business or institution that generates 1 ton of food waste a week, on any given week, has to find an alternative to it. It has to be separated out and find an alternative for disposal. And provided an alternative is available, which we'll get to that in a bit. So this doesn't include residences. And it's been a long time since residences actually separated out separately and had separate collections. That does occur in some places, particularly up in Canada. There's a bit of that. Out west in King County in Seattle, they do that. And they're even trying to get some of that going in New York City. But the state laws in New England all revolve around the commercial generation.
Any rule of thumb on what the ratio is going to be between the institutional restaurant and the residential? I mean, is the residential going to equal it or be half of it, or?
I don't have that handy. I have somebody who can get me that answer, and I'll look into it. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but the 1 ton is a pretty significant threshold. Usually for restaurants, they consider that I think 35 full-time employees, a hospital, 80 beds to a hospital. There's several thresholds for various institutions.
Yeah, but I just mean on total volume. I mean, the 14,000 tons. I mean, is residential going to be an additional 14,000 tons, or is it 2 tons, or?
Well, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but what's more importantly is, are you going to be able to collect it and get it? And at the moment, they're struggling to get the 1 tons.
The reason for the
But that may be possible. It
The
may be
reason for the
possible, I don't
question
know
is-
off
the
the top of
reason
my
for
head
the
exactly
question
what that
is,
would be.
If we know how much it is, that determines the relative importance.
Right.
Okay, if it's 100 tons a year, you forget about it. If it's another 20,000 tons, then it's important.
Yeah, I'm guessing without a forced collection, King County actually fines people in order to get them to, if they don't put their compostables in a separate bag, if they discover it, they actually go back and fine them. And that just went into effect in the last few months. So that's, those types of collection for residential only exist where there is a citywide collection system. And, but I can find out the number. The likelihood is not so much what's generated, but the likelihood of what you're actually going to capture.
So can I just clarify this? Is this saying, if you look at the Orleans line, that there are 22 institutions or restaurants that meet the threshold, and if you sum up only those 22,
Yes.
you're going to get the 889,
Yes.
okay? Everybody else falls below that regulation and therefore, right now, are not being seen as potential candidates for collection because there isn't a requirement to collect from them.
And basically, almost any kind of restaurant or institution is going to hit the target at one time or another. So they did put like a 60%, 70%, whatever. We ignored that percentage because if you're going to because you hit the target just 1 week out of the whole year, for that week you've got to find someplace else to take it. So it doesn't make sense for a restaurant to try and figure out and guess whether it's going to make it or not. They're going to have that diversion set up all the time, and that they're going to have that deal with their hauler. So that pretty much captures everybody, all the institutions that would come anywhere close to it. I'm sorry, you had your hand up?
Well, I think Judith did first.
Okay, so I guess where I'm a little bit confused is, I understand the state mandate that these businesses find another alternative. But in terms of looking at nutrients into our ground and a wastewater plan, the entire Cape has community collection. It all goes off Cape. None of this, I mean, every residence, short of those of us who compost our food waste, all of it is going off Cape to be incinerated. So
Yes, all the trash.
I'm not understanding how
Mixed
this
solid waste.
flows.
So I think the idea is they're looking at what's the potential for using that.
Yeah, so again, it's what you have a realistic chance of capturing. If you look at the King County, they've been at it for more than 20 years, and they've gotten to
They're looking-
the pace
they're looking
now
at-
where they have actual residential collection.
If I'll interrupt, I mean, I think Mike has set this up so that we're going to look at septage and food waste and sewage, and is there some plant that we could build that you would use some combination of these things to...
Then the net result is going to be to increase the nutrients going into the ground because
Not
we are not
necessarily.
now disposing of those.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, this is not going into a septic system. This is food. This is going, as you said, off the Yarmouth, onto the rail cars, and going off the CMAS for incineration.
One of the main drivers for this, as you know, is that food waste has an organic content that makes it a value with regard to energy generation for one side, and the other side is not to fill up landfills with it. So the purpose of these, and these things are becoming, I wouldn't say popular, but more maybe you get the right word here, Charlie, but they're becoming these favorable situations where they can be incorporated into a septage, wastewater, food waste system that doesn't affect nitrogen. It produces solids that need to be dealt with. Charlie's going to go through this. I think we're getting into the rest of his presentation here, but that's the bottom line.
It's a matter of looking at all the options so that you build, whatever plant you build is the most economic solution that you can have. And I think we got to wait and see how it pops out.
Right. So I think the short answer is the food waste is not directly tied to the nutrient.
Yeah, no,
But
right now it's zero.
But what it's tied to is a potential economic, changing the economic benefits of treating the septage or sewage in a different way. Right, so we'll get to that. Carol, did you still have a comment?
No, it's fine, thank you.
I can give you a brief history, because I was involved with this, with the state, back when they were starting embarking on this. And Massachusetts, this was years ago, had a 2,000 ton per day shortfall of capacity for its trash. So 2,000 tons per day would be put on a train and shipped out either to Virginia or out to the Midwest to landfills elsewhere. And the state felt that was intolerable and thought, you know, at least food waste could be captured and treated in a different way. The other thing is that, in general, for greenhouse gases, here we have very limited landfill capacity, but we do have some. Landfills were considered to be overall, I think it's like 1% of greenhouse gas emissions, in that range. I think probably the bigger driver is also just this limited capacity. We just don't have the land or the landfill space. So Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut all have existing rules. Vermont is passing a rule as well. In Canada, there are a lot of rules. The other place you have to go, then you go out west to Seattle, has been pushing at this for a long time. Like I said, they've been at it for almost 20 years.
Okay. Judy, did you have a question?
But this is, as I said, this is meant to be what could you capture, what was capturable and usable in some type of facility or process.
Judy?
I just had a question. Years ago, I visited Mass General Hospital, and they had an extensive separator system for their food waste. It was incredible. But it included not just the food, leftover foods, but it had the plastic forks and knives. So when you say food waste, are you talking about just scrapings, or are you including plastic ware and things like that?
You're getting ahead of me a slate, but essentially you're talking mostly, this is food, but whenever you collect it, you're going to get some of that contamination. The idea is that contamination will be limited, and loads, there are new rules for the loads and how they get inspected. So loads actually have to get inspected periodically as they're brought to whatever the transfer station, and if they have too much of that, then it gets rejected and you have to take it back, or you do whatever you do with it. But 10, 20, 30% contamination rates. If you, even now, there are some facilities where they're supposed to kind of be sorting it out, at least recyclables, they were still getting 50% contamination rate. We should be much less than that. The targets are 10, 20%.
Thank you.
A quick question. Are these net available figures for a facility here in Orleans? In other words, is any of this stuff backhauled off the Cape by, say, Stop and Shop or Shaw's or anything else?
Getting ahead of me again.
Okay,
but yes, I mean, right now this is all going out in the trash. So this is essentially all going to CMAS.
Excuse me, just to clarify that point, I mean, the major supermarket chains are already food composting, so they are taking, there's a provider in Sandwich who goes around and collects the material and takes it off and composts.
I should have just sat down. You guys could do this for me.
Were you not warned they're a very knowledgeable group?
So, treating the septage on Cape, Tri-Town represents a capacity of about 28% of the septage that's generated on the Cape. It probably treats a little bit less than that, but the capacity is about 45,000 gallons a day. It fluctuates between 35,000 and 45,000 that it's actually treating. That's 16.4 million gallons a year out of that 59 million. Of the facilities on Cape, only Barnstable and Yarmouth Dennis, YD, take septage from other towns. Chatham, Falmouth won't take septage from any other town. Barnstable will only take septage if some of the load has septage from within Barnstable. Both of these facilities have very limited capacity. Barnstable says it has really no additional capacity, but it's studying it. So they've got a big facility. They probably can get a little bit more in there. YD said it could take an additional 1 million gallons a year, but it could only take it from December through April in the slow periods. So what that says is that the Tri-Town capacity on Cape cannot be replaced. Tri-Town capacity cannot be replaced on Cape. Sorry, go ahead.
So if you take Barnstable and YD, how much does the Cape have enough capacity to serve all of its septage use, or is there excess septage that needs to go someplace else, or is this part of the home?
No access to, the ability is to treat it on Cape exists now. There's no ability to treat if you take one of those pieces away to then treat it all on Cape. You'd have to then go off Cape for the treatment.
So we have just enough capacity on the Cape to do the Cape.
Give or take. I mean, haulers will make decisions based on the economics for themselves, where they wind up going.
Charlie, just a comment. Also, the Upper Cape towns are looking at this same issue with regard to the Joint Base Cape Cod wastewater plant and ways to use that plant. And one of the things, I was at a meeting yesterday, they're looking at putting a similar kind of facility there. And apparently, in the Upper Cape, I forget the numbers, there's quite a bit of septage going off Cape, up to Wareham, Fall River, and other places. So while there is capacity on the Cape, there's still a lot going off the Cape.
Dave?
Just one question. In terms of Chatham, you're making the assumption that
Well,
Chatham...
This is what they told us.
Right. That is their current policy. There's no argument about that. We, though, at the board have discussed the possibility, though, of initiating a dialogue with Chatham to see if there is flexibility in that. And I take it that conversation hasn't happened in terms of what you're doing, Mike.
The conversation, the brief conversation has happened several times. The answer has always been the same. To get the conversation to be more engaging and to push the issue further, we need a different strategy. Let's just say that at this point. There needs to come at a different level.
Right, it should be more board to
than
board.
our team talking to Bob Duncanson. So,
Thank you, Mike.
Paul?
I want to follow up on that. There was a report done by GHD for Chatham, I think it was 2012, maybe it was 13, in which they claimed, they went through the whole Chatham plant design. And there was a statement in there that said this plant is not designed for a septic treatment facility. However, if you go through the flow sheet and you look at what the various steps are, you can find out which ones are controlling the amount of septage they can handle. And I have done that. I have a memo, which I think I've sent to Mike, but I can send it again, where I've gone through these actual steps. I have concluded, going through my, and by the way, I've done this professionally, so it's not like I'm grabbing at straws. I think for about $2 to $3 million, they could adapt their plant to handle all of the septage out of Tri-Town, and they could do it for 3 or 4 cents a gallon. And you can't, and Tri-Town could not compete with that. So I'd be happy to follow up. I will send you, resend you the memo I went through. I think Stantec should go through
we
those.
have that memo.
Okay, you should go through the flow sheets and validate it to see if it in fact is correct. But I don't agree with that last statement. I think Chatham could easily take the septage load. One other thing, which I'll talk about later, is I'm not sure the septage loads are really correctly calculated, but I'll wait till you're done.
So, and just to be clear, I think what he's saying with that statement is that given what the current policies in place in existing facilities, that doesn't mean that there isn't some kind of negotiation that would change those things, but that's not something that you can ask consultants to undertake.
Our conversations with the treatment plants themselves.
Right.
Conversations about those kinds of things are between town managers and town managers. They don't-
Understand, but the economics play a part in that discussion.
Charlie, quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why would a commercial hauler choose to haul their septage off Cape rather than dump it on Cape?
It would have to be, everything is going to be driven by economics. And I'd be surprised that they would drive from the Upper Cape all the way off Cape, given the fact, unless they had a separate tanker, and we'll get into that discussion, because it's costing them somewhere between $100 and $120 an hour to operate a truck. If he saves 2 cents a gallon on pumping, he's saving $20 on 1,000 gallons. And he's lost, if he's driving from the Outer Cape all the way to someplace off Cape, he's lost 3 or 4 hours of productivity a day when he's spending $120 an hour instead of collecting $300, $250, or $300 for a pump out. The price sensitivity per gallon, generally the cost of pumping out or delivering to a facility it varies, 10, 12 cents a gallon. It's about a third of what they're charging. They're charging something anywhere from 27 to 30 plus cents a gallon for a pump out. So you've got 2/3 of your cost, and you've got your operation. If you're not pumping, then you're spending money. If you're pumping, you're making money. If you're not pumping, you're spending money. So if I'm a hauler, I'm going to do everything I can to keep myself busy pumping and minimize my downtime when I'm not pumping. But every hauler's, there's lots of individual haulers who just have one truck, and they'll make decisions based on, maybe he's got something he has to do in Wareham anyway, or whatever. So there's always going to be all kinds of different things that are going to play into it. But the general economics of running a septic operation is to pump as often as you can and empty at the closest place that you can.
Just a little comment right on that point, Jim. Talking to Jay at the Tri-Town plant over there as trucks are coming in one day, he's pointing out to me that some of the trucks are from Chatham. And the reason they're from Chatham is not because it's closer, it's because the backup at Chatham is such that they would have had to wait a half an hour or 45 minutes in order to discharge. So while they may have some capacity there, there's a lot of complexity in how these decisions are made, as Charlie's pointing out. And you have to really almost look at it macroscopically instead of microscopically, because it's very difficult to get to the point where you understand why these haulers are making decisions.
If we go back here,
Yeah, Jim had a
you can
question.
see your total septic generation is fairly small, 10, 11%, yet your capacity is at 28%. So you're getting a lot of septic coming from other places. And they may say they've been driving. I'm surprised that anybody from the Outer Cape is driving all the way off Cape. But maybe,
I said Upper Cape.
Upper Cape, Upper Cape, that'd be different, yeah. They would because they're closer.
Yeah.
Jim?
With the Tri-Town discussions over the last year, one of the questions that came up was, we've heard that Tri-Town, the question was, why isn't Tri-Town in the costs, in what it charges, why aren't they charging enough to support the essential maintenance for the plant? Why haven't they been charging enough to support the essential maintenance for the plant? If you look at the analysis you just described, we've heard is they couldn't raise the rates, they wouldn't be competitive. That doesn't sound like that's the case. Is there an issue here that Tri-Town has not been charging enough to cover their basic fundamental maintenance, and that they could be raising the rates and still be competitive?
I think, again, talking about, and Charlie may have better information on this, but go ahead, Charlie.
Well, there are a lot of different historical trends. When Yarmouth was built, they were under the impression they could charge anything, but it was built in the 70s and before the fuel crisis, and truckers didn't mind going a little bit further, and they'd drive down to Barnstable, and they could do that, and it wasn't a big deal, or they made the choices, and they were all concerned they weren't getting as much as they thought they would get. That may have been more an issue of how much they thought was actually out there to be had. Again, now trucking is a very expensive item for anybody that hauls anything, and most of the decisions now get made around trucking. Now, whether they should have, over time, there's lots of things that play into that I can't answer to. So, people make decisions about how to allocate money and spend money for lots of reasons.
I think Jim makes a very, very good point, because that's something we have been discussing at the Board of Selectmen level, and actually with our Tri-Town partners in Eastham and Brewster. And it's a very good point. And I think I can objectively say we're getting mixed messages on what the solution to that is. And I think an important part of this, if we can come out with some idea on the price elasticity of that particular product, it's very important, because that's an objective input that we're going to need as we go forward on this issue and running a plant, if the plant continues.
I won't have that number for you today. That number's actually in progress, working
Okay,
on
so
that.
it's on
We
price
don't have
elasticity.
that number for you today.
One of the things to remember in price sensitivity is it doesn't only drive hauler decisions, it drives homeowner decisions. So that if it is $500 to pump out your septic tank, people are going to do it once every 5 years instead of once every 3 years at $300 a pump. So it's not a question of where the haulers take it, it's a question of how often the haulers get a call.
I got to pick up the pace because you're 2 slides ahead of me all the time, so I got to pick up the pace. Okay, so there is ample capacity off Cape. New Bedford has some unspecified, he basically, he hinted he could take it all, but he didn't really say, he wouldn't say how much he had, but he had, his flow rates, he could take 500 gallons a minute, I said that's it's a huge number that he could actually pump, but what he could treat. But it's an unspecified, and that's a 140-mile round trip. Fall River could take 12.8 million gallons a year, which is a 240-mile round trip, and Wareham can take 7.8 million gallons a year, which is a 100-mile round trip. So the capacity's there, and to essentially replace Tri-Town. How would you get it there? Obviously, the first thing, well, just leave it to the haulers. There's a lot of issues with that. The loss of productivity, probably more than double the cost of, as you just mentioned, more than double the cost of pumping, because you're going to lose 3 to 4 hours a day with that truck in productivity time, because it's driving all the way off Cape and driving back. And, of course, you probably discourage maintenance pumping, because the cost will increase so significantly. Tri-Town as a transfer station. You don't run it as a treatment plant, just have a tank. Steve has been through all that equipment, says it's in good shape. It could be continued to operate. You've got the the pump out, the storage tank, and so forth. What it would take to do that, the maximum load you can ship off is about 7,000 gallons. That's a 99,000-pound truckload, truck and trailer and load combined. And you can do that on an annual permit. You have to be renewable every year. So for Tri-Town to replace its capacity of the 45,000 gallons a day, it need 4 of these tractor trailers, as you can see here. That is a 7,000-gallon trailer right there. You need 4 of those, and you need 5 full-time employees at least, to make up that difference and transfer it off.
Some of the haulers have already figured this out.
Well, actually, the numbers they came up with were 9,500 or 10,000 gallons, and you can't haul that. That's what's referred to as a super tanker. It's over 130,000 pounds. You can get a special permit for 5 days to do it, but I don't. It's not something. It's not an operation you're going to be able to do continuously. Your limit's going to be about that 7,000, give or take a few hundred gallons, depending on the final weight of the truck. If you are to treat septic on site, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So far, we've been talking about the septic volume as a sort of a fixed number, and maybe it'll go up or not, right? I think we got to look at Tri-Town in terms of some of the challenges to the business going forward. And if we look at the septic tank and its function, it's normally sized, as I understand it, like 1,000 gallons for a 2 or 3 bedroom house, based on the maximum volume they go through to allow settling of the solids and the scum and so forth. But most homes in Orleans have 2 occupants on average, maybe some 3, but even I think that's even mentioned in the CWMP report. Now, I have a number of references, and I've sent them to Mike, which show that actually if the number of occupants in a house that has a 1,000-gallon tank is only 2, you can go over 10 years between septic tank pump outs. And some other references, in Yelm, Washington, there's a step operation with 1,700 connections, 1,700 residential connections. And once the septic tanks are in, it's run by a sewer authority. So even though there's a septic tank on your property, it's all managed, serviced, maintained, and so forth. They have an average of 3 people per residence, and they pump out septic tanks on 6-year intervals, not 3-year intervals.
Well, I think what you're getting to is into the alternate treatments, which is discussion not today. In fact, I don't think that's today. It's an alternate discussion.
And so, this material has, you've seen this material, right, from
He hasn't seen this.
I don't think so, no.
He hasn't seen this. Let me just finish. In Lacey, Washington, with 3,758 septic tanks feeding a similar situations, their pump-out interval is 8 years. And in Bethel Heights, Arkansas, with 460 connections, the pump-out interval is 9 years. And these are established operations. What I'm saying is there's a downside risk to putting money into Tri-Town. And I think you ought to look at that. Now, for one more reference point, if I can finish, I had a septic tank inspection because of selling my house in May. And after 2.5 years, with 2 residents only, full-time, there was 1 inch of septic and 3 inches of scum. Now, why would I pump on a 3-year interval?
And sludge, 1 inch of sludge.
1 inch of sludge and 3 inches of scum. Why would I pump? When I look at this data, and many of these communities that are based on step systems, they actually use measurements with Sludge Judge, and they track what the sludge levels and scum levels are to forecast what the pumping interval ought to be, because they're trying to optimize the operation. So what I'm trying to say is I think you should look at the downside risk, not only this, but also Chatham.
What we're looking at here are actual numbers reported by the treatment plants of what their flows are, what they're treating, what's being delivered to them.
Stacy.
So I'm not looking at the individual houses, I'm looking at the treatment plant, what are they actually getting and what are they treating? All we looked at is that going to increase or decrease?
Stacy, a year ago, as a selectman in this town, I suggested that we take a hard look at Tri-Town and the market, whatever it is. And I'm looking at what we have in front of us. We have now done 8% of the presentation. And I would hope that we would allow Charlie to continue, and then we have the discussion, because we all have the knowledge to have a reasonable discussion. I'm not looking for alternatives now. I want to know how the last 25 years of septic treatment in this town has worked, what the market is, what everybody else on the Cape is doing. So I hope we can just move ahead, and we're wide open to questions. I look at the agenda. This was supposed to start at 9. It's now 35, and we've done 8 pages. Can we keep it moving, please?
Okay, so people hold comments till Charlie's finished.
So I think we've discussed about whether you leave it to the halls, we discussed that. If you do a transfer station, that's what it's going to take. If you decide to process the septic on site and deal with the solids, how are you going to deal with the solids from that? Currently, the solids are taken down to YD, along with Yarmouth and Chatham, and they're trucked all the way up to Plymouth, Maine, where they're alkaline stabilized and used on land applied on agricultural land. And the cost is about $110 per wet ton, somewhere between $400 and $500 per dry ton, depending on what your solids content is. So if you're looking at processing the solids on site, you don't look at the process, you look at the product. What am I going to get at the back side of this? And that will drive what the process is. Obviously, there's been lots and lots of discussion about energy. How do you get energy? There's lots of ways to get energy out, but really there's just anaerobic digestion. There are several emerging technologies out there: pyrolysis, gasification, thermal hydrolysis. Thermal hydrolysis only helps anaerobic digestion. The other two haven't panned out. The commercial facilities for those have all gone bankrupt and closed. So anaerobic digestion is the best method for getting energy out. What do you do with that? Once you anaerobically digest it, you still have the solids. You have a little bit less of them, but you still have the solids. You have to either compost them or dry and pelletize them, or you land apply them. Now, land applying to agricultural land, there just isn't any agricultural land or any significant amounts of agricultural land on Cape Cod, except for maybe cranberry bogs. But to do that, you need vast quantities of agricultural land. You need vast amounts of ability to store the solids, because you can only apply during certain months and during certain kinds of weather conditions. It's just not a feasible thing here on Cape Cod. So the other thing is to come up with a product that is consumer friendly, that the consumer, that the general public will accept and use. When for that, there are really only two products. They're either compost, and I know I've used the word compost, and I don't want the torches and the pitchforks to come out. I understand the history, and I'll talk about that shortly. But as a soil amendment, compost has been, as an end product, has been generally very well accepted by the public. Dryer and pelletizing, for some reason in Massachusetts, folks don't, there are two large pelletizing plants in Massachusetts, one in Quincy for the MWRA, and the other is in Lawrence, Mass. For some reason in Massachusetts, the general public just doesn't seem to like pellets. When they opened up Quincy, I can remember hearing all kinds of discussion on the radio about, whether people would use it or they wanted it, and nobody wanted it. They thought it was terrible. At the same time, I was buying a lot of plants for my house doing landscaping, and I would be in the nursery and I would see bags of Milorganite sitting right there. Now, Milorganite is just pellets from Milwaukee. Now, maybe the beer makes their stuff better than ours. I don't know. But people would buy that, but they won't buy the stuff in Massachusetts. It's just the public is what the public is. So for energy, like anything, just like making gasoline, you have to have a certain amount of raw fuel to drive. The minimum quantities, so to speak, if you're going to produce energy, you can use a microturbine right there at the top, or a regular piston-driven engine. These are the most common ways. There's steam generators, there's lots of other stuff, but those tend to be very large. This is the practical size, practical type of equipment you're talking about for generating energy from anaerobic digestion of organic solids. For a microturbine, the smallest microturbine you can get is 30 kilowatts. So to put that in perspective, that's 30 microwave ovens making popcorn at once. For an engine generator, the smallest one you can get is 143 kilowatts. Now, there are engine generators out there that you put in your backyard and you turn on for when the power goes out in the winter storms or whatever. Those are not the same thing, and they're not meant for continuous operation. They run at a lower temperature. So you can run them continuously, but you run them at a lower temperature, so they have to have a larger radiator. The downside of that is you need the heat that's generated. Part of the benefit of these is they call it CHP, combined heat and power. You need the heat to heat the material going into the digester to make the bugs work properly. It has to go in at about 90 to 100 degrees, usually around 90 degrees. So you need that heat, and the heat comes right off the engine. So how much septage is needed to actually make that happen? Roughly about, and this is in dry tons, so this is just the solids. Take out all the water, this is just the solids. About 1.8 dry tons per day to run the microturbine at 30 kilowatts. The value of that electricity at 16 cents a kilowatt hour is about $115. So there's a lot of infrastructure there to make $115 a day. For an engine generator, you need 7.6 dry tons of solids a day. The value of that electricity is about $560. Tri-Town, and this is averaged out over its normal operation, is about 1.5 to 1 3/4 of dry tons of solids per day. So it's just too low. If you want to do that, you have to add in something else to the food waste. So to treat septage alone, you're talking about composting. Now, there have been 2 septage composting facilities on the Cape. Here in Orleans, which closed because it was basically an open-air facility with no odor control, and it closed down because it stunk out the neighbors, and rightly so. Yarmouth Dennis had a fully enclosed facility with odor control. They wound up closing down because the equipment they purchased was too unreliable, and they couldn't keep the thing running long enough. It just became too much of a headache and too much of an expense. That was both of those were a long time ago, and times have changed. There are over 200 biosolids composting facilities throughout North America, and they operate close to residential areas, and they operate successfully. That doesn't negate the arguments for the past history, and I understand that. But my job is to present the options, let you know what's available. I threw this picture up just to make the point. This is a totally enclosed biosolids composting. So it's taking sewage sludge at 481 tons per day in Southern California. I worked on this facility back when its operation in 2007. That building is 10 acres. It was an old IKEA warehouse building that we converted into a composting building. The odor control system is right there. It's 3 acres, and it's one of the only odor control systems you can see from outer space. But the point is that this residential area right there, those are full-time residents, that's a prison. Prison has got the previous facility shut down at another location. Over here, and you can't see it, are consumer warehouses. This is in Ontario, California. So all of the consumer goods that come into Long Beach go through giant warehouses in this area. So as I told the client, it's very poor etiquette to send 10,000 cases of toilet paper to Walmart pre-scented. So there's hundreds of millions, tens of millions of dollars of valuable merchandise in these warehouses. So odor control was paramount, and it was successful. It's not the only one. There's lots of them. So it can be done, but, well, what it would take at Tri-Town from a technical point of view would be you have to have ground-up yard waste. You have to, as bulking agent, you'd either grind that here or at a landfill operation. You'd need a completely enclosed mixing and aerated composting for 21 days capacity of storage with odor control. You need a screening system where you'd recover the bulking agent. You also need another enclosed building for another 28 days, which is called curing, but it's essentially just low-rate composting. If you think of a curve like this, it's out of here. You still need to do that in order to get a stable product. You'd need a couple of front-end loaders, a full-time employee, and you'd need lots of area to store the end product. That is a 1,000-foot-long building where they put their winter storage of product. In California, it doesn't get below 70 degrees in the winter, and everybody still has to cut their grass, but they still think they have winter, and they won't buy the stuff in the winter. Yeah, consumer trends could be difficult to predict, at least. Food waste, if you're treating food waste, what are you talking about? And this came up earlier, I believe you brought it up earlier, Mrs. Scanlon. Post-consumer food waste. So there's two types. There's pre-consumer and post-consumer. Pre-consumer is liquid slurry waste or other very homogeneous waste from making food product. So Ocean Spray cranberries. After they crush all the cranberries, all the pulped out, whatever's remaining of that pulp, that would be considered pre-consumer. Post-consumer looks a lot like what you see in this photograph. It's food scrapings, what comes off the plate, what went bad, what went old at the grocery store, what they threw away, lots of produce and so forth. It's messy stuff. Same thing with septic. How do you treat it to get energy? You can anaerobic digest it, and then, again, you still have lots of solids left over, so what do you do with the solids? You either compost them or you pelletize them. How much food waste do you need? In this case, I'm working in wet tons, well, both wet and dry, but I worked in wet because it relates back to that table that we had up earlier. For an engine generator, and they didn't even bother with a microturbine because it's too small to be concerned about. For the engine generator, you need 13.2 wet tons per day or 4 dry tons per day. So you need less food waste than you do septic because obviously septic has been digested through us once already. Food waste hasn't. So if you take all of the average food waste that we had in that other table, and again, that's average, it's not daily, and there's lots of fluctuations, you'd need to capture all of the food waste from Dennis all the way up to Provincetown in order to run that one 143 kilowatt generator. Now, if you were the only game in town, you'd probably be able to capture more than that, but that would be sort of your bare minimum, and probably you'd want to get more of that just because, again, in the wintertime, you still want to be generating. How do you digest?
Charlie, one quick question. That's if you just used food waste.
Yes.
If you do food waste and septic, does that?
The numbers come down a little bit, but there's not a significant drop.
Good.
Remember, the septic was only a few tons a day. If you're going to digest, how do you do it? Because you've got different types of material. So there's essentially two ways when you're dealing with post-consumer food waste. You have the high solids digestion, which looks a lot like this. It's big concrete boxes with airtight doors, and you have the liquid digestion, which is the traditional tanks that you see at wastewater treatment plants. So for high solids digestion, the nice thing about it is you don't have to do a lot to the material. The material comes in, gets dumped on a tipping floor. You need complete odor control for that. It's completely enclosed. You use a front-end loader, and you take the stuff and you drive it into those concrete boxes, and you close the doors, and you circulate water through those, and that water goes off to a tank, like the tank that I showed previously in traditional digestion. The solids stay in there for 2 or 3 weeks, When you open it up, they come out, you still got all the solids. So you then have to do something with it. I got a little bit ahead of myself. Once you go through the liquid, you collect the methane. You have to clean the methane, take the water out, usually compress it so it's at the right specs to go into the engine. The engine will produce the electricity and the heat that goes back and heats the fluid going through the material that then goes to the digester. Then, as I said, you have the composting operation or pelletizing operation in the end. Most of the contaminants you see will get removed at the back end where you're screening either the compost or the pellets. If you had a liquid, and this is more suitable to pre-consumer, but it has been used in post-consumer waste. Again, you have your tipping building, but you also have a pre-processing building where you start out, where you dump the material. It goes by a sorting line, so you pick out stuff that you really don't want, some of the gross contaminants, take out any metal you can. Then you have to pulp and liquefy the waste. And then you have a hydrocyclone to separate out some of the gross solids from the liquid. The liquid still has plenty of solids in it. That liquid goes to digestion, gets digested in the traditional manner. The gross solids go off as trash, essentially. After digesting is done, the liquid slurry from the composting has plenty of solids in it. You have to dewater in the same way that you dewater now the solids at the septic. You have to separate out the water and the solids as best you can, get those solids, and again, those solids have to go either to composting or pelletizing. Most of the contaminants get removed at the beginning, but still some get moved at the end. Some of the small stuff like the plastics and so forth that would get in the solid, friable, drier product at the end. So what does it take if you wanted to have a third party? I know there's been lots of discussion. Someone else will come and do this as a commercial venture. What it really takes to do that is about a minimum of 100 tons per day, about 1 megawatt of electrical generation. This is just a smattering of facilities, either in development or planning. It's not comprehensive at all. Only one of these facilities, the top one, has less than a megawatt, and that's only because it's on farm, it's in Rutland. Most of the waste it treats is the manure from the cows. It's a dairy farm. They have 350 cows. They have a large lagoon of manure. That goes in. They do take in liquid pre-consumer waste from some of the dairies, soft drink, that kind of thing. And the backside of the back end afterwards, everything from the digester goes into another tank, and they just spread that as is on the fields on the farm. So they have very little cost. So that is smaller. Everything else is much larger. I could go down the list. Most of these are development. Some are likely to be built. I think most of these are likely to be constructed. Of these, I think the more important to note, and I'll talk about in a minute, is Harvest Power has a planned facility in Bourne. That one's still very up in the air because they've been in negotiations for 4 years, and the negotiations with the town are still ongoing. The other is Stop and Shop is building a facility in Freetown. That's been permitted. That's 95 tons a day. They probably fill most of that from their own stores, but so we don't know exactly what they'll have excess capacity. Right now, as far as existing facilities, the bottom facility, Marlboro, is a composting facility, takes about 100 tons per day. Originally designed to take in mixed solid waste. It takes about 50 tons of that, and the other 50 is mostly source-separated organics, and the other 60 that goes to 160 is the potential to take in biosolids. So really, it's not likely you'll get someone, unless you're going to bring waste from off-Cape, considerable distance, to build something here and operate it as a merchant facility. In the area, as I mentioned, Stop and Shop has this facility. Harvest Power, as I said, is still negotiating with Bourne. They're getting closer. They've gotten most of the towns used to come along, but the Board of Health is balking still. They want more things. So that whether that happens or not is not a done deal as of yet. There is some potential under the new rules. There are some easier permitting for smaller operations under 15 tons a day. Things like Watts Family Farm in Falmouth, some of the yard waste composting commercial operations on the Cape might do that. I tend to think that the commercial yard waste folks that I know are very close to very populated areas. They're probably not going to risk their operations on it. Watts is separated out. Their biggest issue would probably be the fact that they're very close to a runway, and there are FAA rules on that. So what's next will be the economic review of treating just septage at Tri-Town or treating the solids. Compare that with what you're paying now, which is high, but the quantities are small. There is potential for partner with YD and Chatham. YD still has that facility. It's there. It's fully enclosed. The issues of equipment can easily be solved now. Obviously, there's some investment, and that has to be looked at. Treating of septage and food waste together, we can look and see at that 14 tons a day plus the septage, what the economics. You look at the infrastructure involved. It's not a stretch to see it's going to be quite expensive compared to what you're actually going to get out of it. It's not going to be necessarily a moneymaker, but we'll put the numbers together so that you're aware of what they are.
Okay, with that, questions?
Is that what's going to happen? Is that what your next steps are?
Those are the next steps, yes.
And as part of that, town treating just septage is this issue that Jim brought up on the price elasticity of.
Yes. And that will go with the transfer station as well. Like what does it take to make that economical, and what will people pay?
Right.
The haulers aren't going to tell us, obviously.
And if they do tell it, it may be somewhat biased.
We can get a good idea of what it's going to take if he's spending $100 an hour to drive off. What is he going to turn around and say, okay, bite the bullet and I'll pay it? We'll do that.
I recognize we're trying to process a lot of information in a short period of time, but I think this septage treatment and alternatives are such a basic foundation to what we're going to be doing with this large capital investment that perhaps we need to schedule another time to maybe go a little bit more in depth on this. Septage processing over the last many years has gone through quite an evolution. When we used to have just big dumping pits at the landfill, the town of Brewster, for one, hired people to check the sludge in everybody's septic tank to reduce the amount going into these big lagoons. Once Tri-Town was built, it was more important to generate revenue, so those people were eliminated, and there was a standard schedule recommended to increase to cause a steady flow of revenue to Tri-Town. So I think we're at a juncture where we can really build it right. So that's my comment.
Yeah, this is getting a bit ahead, but it follows on Gordon's comment. Somewhere down the road, we're likely to come up with a solution that combines a number of solutions. And part of the Cape Cod Commission 208 planning discussion was, I've forgotten the correct term, but I think it's called managing entity or management entity. There's also the question of multiple towns. Hopefully we can all get along and we can come up with some solution that works to fix the water in more than one community at a time. But we're not going to do this with a tri-town management group or managing each one of these things separately. If we do, the cost is going to go way out of scale. We're going to need some sort of a managing entity to manage pilot projects, the things we do that are the alternative technologies, that, well, the non-traditional, the traditional. We're going to, I don't know where we're going to go with septage or food waste or any of these things, but we need to be thinking in that context, and it relates to Gordon's comment, because you would, if you had a managing entity, and Paul indirectly brought this up earlier, you would manage so that you pumped the septage at my home once every 10 years because it doesn't fill up, okay, rather than once every 2 years. And you would manage the process in such a way so that you do it in an economical fashion. And other communities have done this. So we need to be thinking a little bit going forward that some sort of a managing entity is going to be needed, and that we're going to we're not going to go with maybe rules of thumb about pumping every 2 years.
Yeah, and actually, that's some of the alternative methods. One of that, I know Steve's talked to me about it. One of the things they're looking at is, does the managing entity own or take control of the septic pumping or whatever? That's sort of different from this discussion here. But yeah, I mean that's definitely part of. I know that's part of the ongoing analysis, but it wasn't part of this particular piece.
I understand that.
Just a quick comment, Jeff, and then absolutely, that is one of the significant issues that we will be looking at, already starting to do that. As a matter of fact, Doug Gardner, who's going to talk about the financial approach, is already working on putting that kind of evaluation in the financial approach, because it has significant implications on the financial framework for this as well. The administrative and management costs for such an entity, but also it opens up doors for additional revenue generation from, say, Title V users, where you're actually managing traditional Title V systems as well as INAs, as well as the non-traditional, as well as septic, as well as wastewater, as well as potential reuse systems. So this is a complex framework we're looking at here, which is really a sort of a 21st century radio with a lot of knobs on it that all have to be adjusted and harmonized together. So that's part of this evaluation that we'll start picking up steam as we go on here into the quote hybrid alternative.
Just a question about process, and I think it's what Alan was going to before. As we did with the alternative methods, we sat around our table and listened and gathered a lot of information. We didn't have at it as we were going through the process. As it seems the tone has changed a bit here, we're having at it, raising questions, alternatives as we're going through. Clarify the process here for me.
So I think as in the non-traditional, people raise, for example, some concerns about PRBs, whether they, what the acceptability, what their concerns might be with them. The goal right now, I think, is you saw what the next steps are. What else do they need to consider as they're taking these next steps? What's your input that you can offer them now to make sure that the work that's being done, moving us from this step to the next, is going to be answering the questions that you have and responding to the opportunities and all of those things. I think all of that is really important to bring out on across the board. And then we'll come back, right? But we are really meaning to get people's concerns and things they want more exploration of out here and during this time. Okay, so let me come back here because
Hi, Beth Carney. Septic, composting, food waste. When you're talking about odor control, you're talking about scrubbers. And then the second question is some contaminants are removed. What contaminants are not removed?
Oh, that line with this, I'll start at the end first. The some contaminants, that was for the liquid slurry digestion. So most of the contaminants were moved up front, some at the back. Otherwise, all the contaminants get removed at one point or another. Otherwise, the product's no good. The first part of that, as far as odor control, that's a design issue. There's lots of different types of odor control. The one you saw in the picture of the very large facility happened to be called what's known as a biofilter. It's the most commonly used for composting operations because of the materials that are used, and the methods of maintaining it are very simple. It's very economical for that type of operation. But there's we've done a lot of odor control work over the years. It depends on each situation, how much space you have. There's lots of very effective methods of doing it. But, so, we're not designing it here.
So when you say biofilters, do you mean like carbon sources?
Carbon is a different type of filter. Biofilter is actually, it can be inorganic or organic media, but it's a much larger system, more residence time within it, but they're very effective. They're introduced back in the as late as the 50s, but they're very effective.
Yeah, so we can get more into the details of all the different design options and implications a little bit later, maybe. Judith?
Okay, so for me, this is a lot for me to get my head around, frankly. It's just almost completely overwhelming. I was kind of coming today thinking we were going to be talking about traditional approaches to wastewater, and I feel like a whole new piece has been introduced, which certainly is terribly important. I'd be the first to say that we need to be concerned about how we take care of our trash and our waste, all of it. But just seeing this and hearing it for the first time, as I say, I find it really overwhelming. So just a couple of initial things that would be of concern to me. We all know that odor is an issue, and I mean, those of us who were around for the early days of Tri-Town know that this is a huge issue. And it's one thing to say that, yes, there is this plant, and it's next to a prison, and it's next to a warehouse. We have residents in town who you can literally throw a stone on the compost shed from their backyard. And the very idea that we might be looking again at something and saying, oh yes, there's now new great odor control out there, I mean, forgive me, but I have a hard time buying that and thinking that we are ever going to get to the point where you could do such effective odor control on this that it would not be an issue. The second thing that I have is we now have this product of compost, pellets, compost, whatever. What are we going to do with it? Because if we're just going to put it on our land to go right back into our groundwater, we've spent a lot of money to process stuff to accomplish nothing. Do we know the rate at which that land is going to uptake these nutrients before it flows right back into our water? Because again, right now, it's irresponsible perhaps to say our solution is to ship it to CMAST and have it burned. I mean, I grant you that's not a solution. On the other hand, from the standpoint of cleaning up our waters, it's a very good solution. And we're now bringing back in a whole group of nutrients that we haven't been taking into consideration, that now we're going to have to take into consideration. So those would be
It gets into a very technical discussion, because I understand your point, and I brought this up to Mike quite some time ago. It's not exactly, doesn't really work that way, but it's a very technical discussion. It's not really for here, we can have it. But obviously, there are, and when we came to interview for the project, I was very reluctant to mention the word compost. It was asked about it, and I said, I'm glad you asked, because I didn't want to bring it up because I know the history. And I have been to many, many public meetings where the torches and the pitchforks come out, and I waited till the policeman left so I could go out to my car. So I understand the kind of things that went up against. But it is my job to tell you what the options are. Yeah.
So what I don't want to do is actually try to engage in a back and forth about these issues right now. What I want to do is raise the issues so that the consultants can take it back. If you think you have information about odor control, about the use of the compost and where you think it would happen, hold that for now, because we're not going to actually debate or discuss the solutions. I just want to make sure that what we're doing at this point is raising those issues to direct the consultants as they take their next steps forward. And if you have information you want to offer, to send that to me separately or to Mike, and we'll get it to them.
I'm not looking for an answer today.
I'm just, those who want to give an answer, I'm trying to stop you from giving an answer. Okay.
One quick, this is happening, so we put it in the context of the traditional because it's something to consider as you're looking at the plan. The other part, the concerns about the existing facility are overwhelming and clear to us, to me, and the consultants, and the encouraging part that came, the two pieces that came out of what Charlie's saying is that we're probably on the margin, given the risk and everything else, where we're not looking at this, from what I'm gathering from this preliminary assessment for food waste and composting is off the table in Orleans, from what I'm hearing, from what Charlie's saying, from the market and from local concerns and everything else. The one fact I think we probably ought to follow up with is with YD. if in fact they have a facility, if in fact there's no abutter issues, if in fact it is an investment that could partner with them, that could make money, that seems to me to be something to go forward with that takes the scope from here, which is what we're trying to do here, down to here, and lets us focus on that. So that's kind of the sense I'm getting where we are right now, so.
I'd like to ask a question. You showed some charts which showed that the population decreased as a function of time.
Yes.
And yet the Cape Cod Commission, if I understand it, has predicted a 39% increase, which was on one of your charts for the next chart. Yeah.
This was increases in water use, and these were over, I think it was essentially be like an ultimate build-up. It's not within a specific time frame. It was just the first place we looked for a trend. So there's a lot of drivers to water use, but it does trend, septage does trend with it, and the question was, well, the drivers that might be driving that are probably not going to be the same to be driving the septage, and that's why we looked at the other things.
And I do want to note, I just want to note that that has been raised as a thing to follow up with, and it's
Okay.
on our action items to do. Okay. Jim, and then.
From a scope question, I want to go back to Judith's earlier question about why we're looking at food waste at all. It's not like it's not important, but are you looking at food waste because you might need the volume to generate a larger solution, or is there some other problem that we haven't identified associated with taking it off Cape? Basically, why, it's not like we don't have enough on our plate.
So to speak.
No pun intended.
The reason for looking at it was, one, the new bill, the new Massachusetts bill, and the implications of that. When we scoped this and when Stantec started, there's a lot of people looking at this. The other is not so much a need as an opportunity. If there's a captive market here, if there's a need, if the trucks are driving by us and we can take it and we're doing anaerobic digestion, if we can put anaerobic digestion on a plant site, mitigating all the issues, and generate energy from it and lower the cost of the facility, lower the user cost as a result of this, and in a reliable, confident way, then it's something I think we needed to look at. We're looking at it, and we're coming to conclusions about it to see where we are. But frankly, this is new waters we're going into here around the state. So we had to look at it. I think it's more due diligence as much as anything.
And it's, I think, given the way you framed it, it's the former. It's the value creation opportunity, right? By bringing this in, do we create more potential options for solutions to the problems we are here to address? It's not to just take on a new problem. Alan?
Yes, just on your prediction based on Cape Cod water use too high slide, you had a developable land, Orleans, 605 acres, 6.7%, year 2003. Before running for public office, I served on the Open Space Committee in this town, and we took a lot of that land out of circulation. Chris Ramsey, who's now here somewhere, is the Orleans Conservation Trust. Other land has been taken out of circulation, and I can tell you that in that period, 115 dwelling units have been built in Orleans. So I think we need to go back and get a firmer number, and the data is all available to do that. And I would just, one other comment. I know I was away 2 weeks ago when there was talk about population decline, and it shows here. I believe that if you're planning a capital facility, you need to think about dwelling units in the community, not people living in them, because that is the capacity you ultimately have to plan for. And having been in a community that went from 53,000 to 42, your community, the number of dwelling units actually increased. So we need to think about the ultimate users, not the aging population or declining population here. And then, taking that into account, then we decide what the new capacity ultimately has to be.
Okay, so I want to wrap this, because we're quite behind. Josh?
Just a quick question on energy generation. Are there revenue generation opportunities here? And can we be specific
Well,
about
I
that?
can say, yes, that the reason for this evaluation was to answer that question. Other towns are generating revenue from these types of operations.
That needs to be a specific part of the presentation because it's not immediately clear.
Yeah, the revenue comes from the tip fee. Making electricity or any of that is a little bit of gravy on the side, but your operation is always will come down to being contingent on what you could get for a tip fee. All commercial and municipal run on the same principle.
That should be prominent in this discussion because
Okay, so really helpful input. If people want to have more information or thoughts about this as this study is going forward, just send them our way. We'll make sure that they get forwarded on. Let's move on to talking about potential disposal site evaluation. And just to say, we may have to stop you midway for a break.
Exactly. Yeah, I know we have a lot to go through. So basically, in front of you, and we provide this on Friday, you should have a matrix that we prepared along with potential disposal site map. So that might be helpful to follow along. We numbered the sites and then matched with the matrix. So basically, my intention for today's presentation is to give you an understanding of what evaluation criteria we use, and also get any questions or input on that criteria that we went through. Oh, sorry. All right. So first step, I just wanted to go through the options we have for disposal. So when I go through the sites, you can get a sense of, okay, what are we talking about? What's the site going to look like? So here, we talk about disposal. There's also, you'll go through collection, treatment. That will be touched upon at a later workshop. So in disposal, there's the option for water reuse as well. That will be talked about later in our presentation. So I am just going to touch upon the disposal sites in particular. So we have concrete leaching chambers as one option. So when you see a site where there may be a parking lot, existing parking lot, we're talking about we would need these concrete chambers. They're H2, they have an H20 loading, so they're suitable to go under a parking lot. You can arrange them to suit the size of your disposal needs, but it would also be an expensive option. Next one we could look at are plastic leaching chambers. These are very similar to the same ones used for stormwater capture. So similar idea, but in this case we'd be using it for treated wastewater effluent. It has an H10 loading, so this would be great for under recreational fields or just an open green space, whatever it deems necessary at the site. Then we have the last option is sand beds. All the components are visible, so basically you would see the pipes, you'd see the sand, you wouldn't see the distribution box, that would be buried. But that leaves this disposal option as the land use. It can't be used for anything else. It's basically just a disposal site. It would be fenced in. But it is good for maintenance because you can see everything, so you'll know if something gets plugged up. And it's also the cheapest option for disposal. So when we started off, we received quite a few sites from the CWMP that they had looked through. We took that list and we met with the town planner. We added some additional sites based on discussions with him. And we also took off a few sites from the CWMP that we knew were completely out of the running. So that left us with a total of 28 sites that you see in your matrix and on the map there. We went through first an initial screening process, which looked at the watershed location, flood zone, if it's within the public water supply zone 2, areas of critical environmental concern, natural heritage, habitat of endangered species, or if it was conservation land. If it was in any of those items, we took them off the table for this initial screening process just because we know there's a a lot of permitting and some acts of legislation with conservation land. So at this stage, we did not look at those further, but they, if we needed to, we could always go back to them. And then so after going through that initial screening process, we took the remaining sites and evaluated those further using additional criteria that I'll discuss. So starting off with the initial screening process in the Cape Cod Bay watershed, we have the Namskakett, Little Namskakett, and Rock Harbor watersheds. So here there are a few concerns with Namskakett. I know that's where there was some talks of there being a concern that the Tri-Town site is actually site number 1, you can see there, and with the effects of disposal at Tri-Town site on the Namskakett Marsh. So for our current evaluation, we did not include any sites that were in Namskakett to look at further, so that includes sites 1 through 4. And then in Rock Harbor, we're looking at classification. I know there's a lot of talk about adaptive management in that watershed as well. So in order to not complicate things and put more nitrogen into that watershed, we took sites 8 and 9 off the table initially as well. So that leaves us with 5, 6, and 7 to move forward with. Town Cove and Meeting House Pond are also interesting watersheds. Lou is going to talk more about the nitrogen requirements at those watersheds and why we're going to take those sites off the table initially for disposal. And he'll give more details, so I don't want to cloud up the time with that. So we took sites 12, 13, and 17 off the table. But I do want to note 10 and 11 are the ball fields. So although that wouldn't be looked at as a disposal site, but it could be an option for reclaimed water irrigation. So we left that there. Then we have the Atlantic Ocean, Mill Pond, and Nauset Marsh watersheds. For these watersheds, we looked closely at what were the environmental concerns for some of these sites. You can see that Site 27 is right along the shoreline. It's within the flood zones, so we took that one off the table. Site 14 has wetlands scattered throughout within the flood zone as well, so we took that off. And then 28 is a national park for the sea shore there, so we took that one off. But we left 15 and 16 as options. And now, so in the Pleasant Bay watershed, we had quite a few sites located in there, but again, as with a previous slide, a lot of these came off the table for a variety of reasons. 19 is within the public drinking water zone 2, so we would not recommend disposing there at this time. Sites 20 and 22 are conservation land, so we took that off the table. And then we have some sites 23 and 24 within the ACEC, and then we also have the Natural Heritage Habitat as well. So those were, and they're close to the shoreline, so we took those both off. And down in the bottom, you'll see 25 and 26. 26 is within a flood zone and the ACEC, so we moved that off the list as well. So we're moving forward with 21 and 25. And yeah, so I kind of ran through those, but just to give you an overview, so we're looking at 7 sites. There's 3 in Little Namskakett, 2 in the Atlantic Ocean watershed, and then 2 in the Pleasant Bay watershed. So that just gives you a sense of what we moved forward with. So for our further investigation at this point, we looked at ownership, topography, distance from wetlands, freshwater ponds if applicable, soil conditions, and area flow capacity. I did want to note depth of groundwater is very important, but we'll be holding off that until we move forward into contacting the owners of these sites to do an intensive on-site investigation. At this point, we did not go on the sites and do any detailed work because we would require their approval first. So we're holding off on that at this stage. So this was more at our 500-foot level as far as looking at these sites. So I'll just run through the sites now. Site 5, this is the one that's located in Little Nantucket. It's privately owned, so the town would have to get ownership of this land in some way. It's actually the plaza where Stop and Shop, so you'd probably be familiar with that area. There is an existing... Shaw's. Okay, thank you. There is an existing leaching field beneath the parking lot, but the way we'd work with that, they would go on, the sewer system, so that would go out of commission, and we'd have to construction sequence and then build the new leaching disposal area. This would, again, be under a parking lot, so you'd use those concrete chambers, and there would also be a lot of coordination with the businesses there during construction. They're not going to want to be out of commission for any extended period of time. So there's a lot of I guess, obstacles with this option, but it does give us, it meets all the requirements we need, and it gives us a good area of flow capacity. So we wanted to keep that on the table to look at. Site 6, this is owned by Mass DOT. It's one of the Cloverleaf lots. This would also involve a lot of discussion with Mass DOT, with the town, and coming up with an agreement on leasing the area to be used for disposal. So there's definitely that could be a roadblock, but it's something we can still go through. As far as topography goes, we can bulldoze and make that work. So not too worried about the hilly conditions, and also it's a large area, so it gives us a good flow capacity. Access to the site is another concern we have when looking at this one. But with all that said, there are things we can work out, so we'll keep this on the table as well. Site 7 is the last site in Little Nantucket. This is a privately owned lot. It's vacant currently, so we'd be looking at doing a disposal area there. This is an option where you could have a subsurface with the plastic leaching chambers. So nobody would see it. It could be a ball field. It could be attractive to the town. But there's the ownership issues that we still would have to go through. And that gives us a pretty good flow capacity as well. Okay, Site 15, we're moving over into the Atlantic Ocean now. This is also a privately owned lot, and you can see here it's in a dense neighborhood. Oh, yes.
So should we stop and take questions on the Little Nantucket ones?
Oh, yeah, we can stop it.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
That's fine.
I may be misremembering, but my understanding is that the Little Nantucket watershed is right now built up against the TMDL limit. And at this point, we don't need to do any soaring in there. But if we dispose into it, now you're going to have to be soaring into there.
That's a really good question. Actually, Lou does go over that when he goes through.
Okay, then forgive me for interrupting.
Oh, no worries. He does show what happens if we dispose in these areas. But that's a very good question. Yeah, so if there are any questions on Little Nantucket, I can take those now then.
How did you calculate the capacity range?
Oh, yep.
Did you use realistic fraction of the property and?
Initially, we looked at about 20% of the total land, and then we also used the aerial footage to get a better sense whether or not we could get more or less of that. To get the gallons per day, we had Massachusetts provides, for treatment systems for leaching fields, what the capacity you could get based on the soil, and that range is 2 to 5 gallons per day per square foot. So we took the square footage that we thought was accessible on site based on the roughly 20%, and then applied the 2 and 5. So that's where the range we get the 2 to 5 gallons per day per square foot.
I don't know about this property, but at Skakit Beach, where there's a leach field, it's 0.7 gallons per day per square foot.
That's what they're, okay.
Stop.
Oh, well, there is a difference between Title V and treatment system disposal. So, yep, that's a good point as well.
Just a quick one. For all the sites in this watershed area, this one is owned by Amstar Electric. How likely do you think they'll allow you access to do further investigation? And if they say no, this is going to go?
Well, With talking to the town planner, he actually brought that up, that NSTAR was a good site. They've started discussions with them. I have not spoken to them personally, but I know when we were going through the sites, this is actually one of them where he's like, I've talked to them, keep this on the list. So he did say that, but again, it is something we'll have to look at further before we get, 100% confirmation on that one.
Site 6 has an existing curb cut.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
Site 6 has an existing curb cut from 6A.
Oh, it does. Okay. Perfect. So that will help things.
So,
I wasn't going to solve all your problems.
Yeah. We got access.
well, no, this is just the 15 I'm just wondering whether we should break on time.
I
And then
have
come back.
4 slides to go through.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're
So
just,
let's do it.
yeah, I just have the final 4 sites that I can run through quickly. So I think we're talking about Atlantic Ocean and just some of the concerns where it's in a neighborhood. So there'd be a lot of buy-in we'd have to get there. And at this specific location, it would be a satellite treatment, so we would need a treatment facility on site. And that 10,000 square feet is a very conservative number, could be smaller, there's going to be underground tankage as well. But it's just to give you an idea of footprint, how it would look on the site. So that's what we're looking at here. So we left 15 on the table, even though it does have a number of hurdles we'd have to go over there. 16 is actually a town-owned site, so that was exciting. It's the old Hubler Motel. Here, from talking to the town planner, there were some thoughts of making this into a parking lot, demoing all the buildings for additional parking for Nauset Beach. So here you could use the concrete bleaching chambers and get the capacity and have a parking lot on top. That finishes Atlantic. Do you want me to just go through Pleasant Bay now? Okay. So Pleasant Bay, we have those 2 remote sites as well. We would be looking at a treatment facility and disposal area. And actually here you'll see we used more of this area. It's a vacant lot. I know initial discussions were they were interested in selling, but there's, that's just initial talk they had. There's still a lot that we'd have to go through with the coordination to get this site. But, it's far away from wetlands and the other conditions look good, so we'd move forward with that one as an option. And our final site is 25, and I think this is probably the trickiest one. It's an existing farm operation, and it's privately owned, so we'd be disrupting their operation. Then they would have a treatment site and a facility on their site. So there would have to be a lot of talk to see if this is something that's potential that could be moved forward with. So those are the ones we have.
I just had a quick question with regard to the designations on top where it says residential / commercial. Is that just coming from the town assessing records?
Yes, it is. Yep.
I just was curious, that particular lot, I know it's privately owned and it's under Chapter 61 lands.
Yes.
It was
It-
never
oh,
my
for the
impression
farm
that it
land.
was
Okay.
commercial, but maybe it has that designation. I'm just curious. Thank you.
Okay.
It's a farm.
30 years ago, in the earlier planning phase for wastewater, the area in and around the transfer station was looked at. And it was discarded at the time because nobody spent the time to understand what the groundwater flow was. And I think it would be worthwhile going back and taking a look at that, because it is admittedly, it's in the Town Cove watershed, but it is a site that is severely disturbed. And if we're talking about either treatment or just disposal, I think we ought to know about it.
Yeah, we'll look into that one.
The
more
other
Mm-hmm.
then.
one that has come up off and on earlier is on Old Colony Way. There is a significant leaching field for the Old Colony apartments. And I think it might be worthwhile just exploring that.
believe it's in the Little Nantucket watershed, but just to double check.
Yeah,
Did you consider drip dispersal at all as an option?
Not in this stage. We were just looking at basic large capacity disposal sites for our bookend. But that is something I think we'll look into more.
Because it potentially could provide some large-scale
It could, yeah.
effluent, and it would also open up sites 10 and 11 without the need for considering water
Okay.
reclamation.
I'm sorry, Brian, what was that?
Drip dispersal.
Drip dispersal?
Drip
dispersal.
Small tubes that are very easily installed, but they're subsurface, and therefore that doesn't trigger any sort of water reuse or reclamation
Thanks,
regulations.
25, it looks from the map as if the ACEC boundary goes over 25 as well. And I'm just wondering if you could point out on this visual where that
Yeah.
boundary would be.
All of Tarkiln Creek is
It-
ACs.
You know, you're correct. It probably, I think it does straddle that property line right in here. So we would have to, this area is more shown just to give you a sense of, to scale, but we could, you know, maybe move that over there or get it, do a funny shape in here to get it out of that. Like, so we wouldn't recommend to have it within that area. We'd have permits that we'd have to go through.
Provincetown used, I don't know whether it was the dispersal technique, but the stuff they did along Route 6.
What Provincetown did was basically use chambers in the median and the rights of way. But in order to do that, it was an act of legislation because actually Mass DOT ceded that portion of Route 6 to the town.
Brian, you mentioned sites 10 and 11, and you mentioned drip dispersal. How does that differ from the reclaimed water irrigation for those fields?
Well, the reclaimed water regulations would be for things like spray irrigation, where there would be surface exposure, whereas this would be a subsurface distribution that would not necessarily come into play.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's take our break, 15 minutes, no more. We'll come back in 10 to